They spat on her shawl as she passed. They mocked her cracked hands, her dirt-stained skirts, her silence at the village well.
To them, she was nothing. Another forgotten woman scraping for water at dawn, avoiding the eyes that judged her. But beneath that worn fabric, beneath the bruises, she never explained, stood the bloodline every lord in the valley had been hunting for, a name whispered in sealed court records. A child presumed dead after a massacre no villager dared to speak of anymore. And while they laughed at her poverty, she listened, she waited. She counted every insult like a bead on a rosary, each one a reminder of what had been stolen from her. No one suspected that the true heir, the one whose return could tear the entire province apart, was standing among them, drawing water with trembling hands, preparing for the moment history would no longer ignore her. Before we reveal the buried truth of who she was, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the real stories that time tried so desperately to erase. They called her Marta of the Wastes because no one cared to learn her real name. She arrived in the village of Lyrinford on a rain-soaked afternoon 14 years earlier, thin, silent, shivering beneath a wool cloak that smelled of smoke and river mud. The elders claimed she had been found near the northern road unconscious, half-starved, and clutching nothing but a rusted brooch engraved with a symbol no one recognized. They told the villagers she was harmless, that she had lost her home in some distant calamity, and people nodded, pretending to care, before returning to their gossip and barley fields. Yet Marta rarely spoke. She worked for scraps, washing linens for the inn, tending goats for a widower who hardly looked at her, collecting water at the well before sunrise so she did not have to stand near anyone. Her eyes were always lowered, not in humility but in habit, as if she had spent years learning that eye contact could get her killed. The villagers mocked this silence. Some said she was slow. Some said she was cursed. Some said she was lucky the reeve even allowed her to stay within the borders. Every insult was thrown casually, thoughtlessly, just another cruelty woven into the fabric of rural life. They never noticed how her jaw tightened, how she flinched only when someone mentioned the Lord's castle, how she froze whenever guards rode through the market square, studying the banners stitched with a golden stag. No one wondered why that emblem unsettled her. No one asked. No one imagined the truth. Lyrinford itself sat in the shadow of Dargmoor Keep, the seat of Lord Brennan Asterholt, a man both respected and feared. He ruled with a steady hand, stern with taxes, swift with punishment, generous only when there was something to gain. Most villagers rarely saw him, yet they knew his story. 2 decades ago, he had been appointed guardian of the northern province after the royal family branch that once governed this land was brutally wiped out in a single night of flames, betrayal, and vanished heirs. Only a few high nobles knew the exact details. Everyone else spoke in whispers of assassination, forged claims, and a throne reclaimed through bloodshed. But those whispers never reached Marta. At least, that is what the villagers believed. The truth was, she knew every detail. Because she had been there. She had been one of them, one of the heirs. But to the people of Lyrinford, she was the woman whose skirt caught in thorns, whose palms were perpetually cracked, who spoke with the soft, guarded accent of someone who'd once lived inside stone walls and now had forgotten how to pronounce her own past. No one looked closely enough to see the noble posture she instinctively straightened into when startled. No one noticed she could read, something no farmhand woman her age should have been able to do. No one questioned how she knew the history of every trade route, every minor lord, every rumor traveling through the inns. Marta made herself small on purpose. She hid in plain sight because survival demanded it. But on a winter morning when frost coated every roof tile like powdered glass, the first crack in her anonymity appeared. As she was filling a pail at the well, 3 riders arrived bearing the stag banner of Lord Brennan. The villagers immediately stepped back, bowing, murmuring respectful greetings. Marta kept her head bent, pretending not to exist. Yet one of the riders, a younger man with sharp eyes, stared at her a moment too long. "Girl," he said, "look up." She continued adjusting the rope. He dismounted, boots crunching on frost, and took hold of her wrist, not violently, but firmly enough that she knew she had no choice. She lifted her eyes only for a brief second, just enough to appear frightened and submissive. But that second was enough. His expression tightened. "Have we seen you before?" he asked. "You look familiar." A cold shiver ran down her spine. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it might betray her.
"No, my lord,"
she whispered. Before he could press further, another rider interrupted. "We haven't time for this, Rowan. The Lord wants us back before nightfall. There's news from the capital." They mounted again and rode off, leaving the villagers buzzing with speculation. Marta's hands trembled. She spilled water on herself. It took her minutes to steady her breath, because that night, Rowan had once served in the very keep where her family had been murdered. He had been a squire then, far younger, but still present. And if he recognized even a fragment of her face, everything she had built, the quiet, the safety, the invisibility, could collapse. That night, Marta returned to her small cottage at the edge of the woods and bolted the door. She lit a single candle and opened the wooden box beneath her floorboards. Inside lay the rusted brooch, the one clue she had kept from her past, carefully wrapped in cloth. On the back, half scratched but still decipherable, was the crest of her house, the crescent moon and 3 stars, the symbol of the rightful rulers of the province. The symbol Lord Brennan had burned from every document. Marta clutched it tight. For 14 years she had hidden. For 14 years she had said nothing. But the kingdom was shifting. Rumors were spreading. Old loyalties were waking. She knew that Rowan would return. And when he did, silence would no longer protect her. Yet the real twist came the next morning, when she approached the well and found every villager staring at her in stunned silence. Someone had nailed a parchment to the stone wall, a royal decree offering a large bounty for the capture of the missing heir. And beside the description, drawn in frightening detail, was her face. When the parchment appeared nailed to the well, fear moved faster than gossip. Faces that had spat on her now averted their eyes or offered furtive glances. The same hands that once tossed bread crusts at Marta now tightened on pitchforks and ledgers. The bounty had drawn more than curiosity. Within days, a ragged band of mercenaries and small-time hunters circled the outskirts, answering the promise of coin. The village that had tolerated Marta's silence turned brittle with a new, urgent purpose: to survive this suddenly dangerous season. Marta understood the economy of fear. She also knew the law, which is to say, she understood how the powerful reframe truth until it favors their survival. The brooch beneath her floorboard felt like a coal against her palm. It burned with history and accusation. She had planned for hiding, not for exposure. Her life had been a ledger of small deceptions, learning to read quietly, borrowing names at the market, accepting the kindness of 1 or 2 suspicious souls who could not afford to be principled. Now every lie had weight. When the hunters came for her, the widower she worked for, old Jory, led them with a face like a stone. He had kept her firewood stacked in winter, but he had also sold a pig to a mercenary when the price was right. Jory's betrayal was not framed by malice but by calculation. He had daughters to feed, and a bounty would fill that hole. Marta let them seize her without screaming. There were many smaller deaths in the world: shame, hunger, the steady erosion of dignity, so she preserved her voice for when it counted. In the brig at the Lord's Manor, Marta found herself in a room that smelled of leather, wine, and old parchment. Lord Brennan arrived not with the swagger of a tyrant, but the measured patience of a man used to being obeyed. He looked at Marta the way a tax collector studies a ledger's ink, searching for profit, for error, for leverage. The Lord's accusation was swift: an impostor, a lost peasant pretending to be a noble for pity and position. He made the case so smoothly that some of his own guests nodded, convinced by the cadence of authority. And then Rowan stepped forward. He had been a rider at the well. Now he stood in the great hall in the livery of the Lord's inner circle, but his gaze found Marta as if it had been searching for months. Only later would Marta learn that Rowan had been the kind of man who carried guilt like a weapon, present at the night of the massacre as a green squire, ordered to hold a gate he would not forget. He had watched children carried past him on torches and horses, and for 20 years he had lived with the sensation that his silence had been a kind of murder. "Your Grace," Rowan said, "I have seen her before. I remember the face of a girl in the keep, small and stubborn. I remember a brooch, too, handed to a nursemaid. I remember a cry and a child taken away. Rowan's confession cracked the air. The steward, a thin man with the hollowed cheeks of someone who believes in order above truth, protested. "You mistake nostalgia for evidence," he said. "We have no proof." Rowan reached into his coat and produced a scrap of paper, an account he had stolen years ago from the castle clerk, a ledger listing names, payments, and a shorthand notation. Remittance for removal of Asterholt heirs. The strip of parchment smelled of ink and damp, but the words were clear enough. Someone else in the hall recognized the handwriting. An old scribe who had been pressed into service the night of the fire. He stepped forward, hands shaking, and read aloud what he had once recorded with trembling indignation. The story he told was smaller and crueler than rumor. A conspiracy brokered with the blessing of a faceless cabal, fearful nobles, and a lord who found opportunity in ash. As the words sank into the hall, faces shifted. Some wept, some cursed, others plotted. Lord Brennan's composure thinned into panic, then into rage. He ordered Rowan arrested as a liar. The steward called for immediate execution of the accused. The fast, simple answer to a complicated shame. The court lurched toward violence like a grazing animal. Marta watched the ripple of consequence and felt something old and impossible loosen inside her. She could have taken the cloak of legitimacy then, placed the brooch on her breast, raised a voice that had been silent for too long, and let lords rally either for her or against her. Claims would be made, alliances forged, blood would follow. In the ledger of history, the province would be recorded with more names and more graves. She thought of Jory's daughters and of the mercenaries waiting like wolves beyond the hedgerow. She thought of Rowan's quiet guilt and of the scribe's hands, so old and shaking from penning truth. Power here would be a blade used without remorse. She had been forged in ashes. She had learned what being wanted can cost a people who had nothing. So Marta did something no one expected. She asked for a public hearing at the nearest market when the merchant caravans passed through in 3 days' time. She requested that the steward and the scribe present their documents openly. She demanded the Lord answer for his deeds. People prepared for an uproar. Some sharpened their knives, others their tongues. Marta did not plan a throne for herself. She planned a reckoning. On the day of the market, a crowd gathered that stretched past the stalls and the cooper's yard. The steward stood pale, the scribe beside him. Lord Brennan arrived with an escort of silent men. Rowan, unbound, handed the stolen ledger to a traveling cleric who agreed to read it into the town record. Words were spoken, accusations made. The steward's voice trembled into confession. For a moment, truth seemed capable of reshaping the rules. Then, as the scribe finished reading, a royal courier arrived, breathless and official. The sealed parchment he carried bore the royal seal, a writ dispatched days before, legitimizing Brennan's governance and advising that any challenge would be treated as treason against the crown. The merchant crowd fell silent like a field being plowed. Marta looked at the seal and felt the old private knowledge close like a fist. The crown had chosen stability over inquiry. The law now favored Brennan, whether he deserved it or not. To press on and demand the throne would invite not justice, but a royal army marching through villages that could not afford it. She reached down, fingers closing around the brooch. It no longer felt like proof of personal right, but like an ember that could set the whole province alight. She could stand, scream truth, claim name and blood, and invite foreign banners and burning. Or she could walk away and keep the lives of Lyrinford's people intact. Marta did not choose glory. She stepped forward in the hush and broke the brooch in two, letting both halves clink into the dust of the market. "I am not a queen of banners," she said, voice steady with an economy of grief. "I will not be used to crown more violence. If justice is to be done, let it be done through law, not through the sword of ambition." The crowd held its breath. Rowan's face bent with a grief that was almost tenderness. Lord Brennan's men muttered. The royal courier pocketed his seal, confused by a woman who refused the claim he was meant to punish. Marta left Lyrinford soon after, slipping into the northern woods with a few coins and a cloak given by Rowan. She would not vanish like a ghost, nor wear a crown. She became for a while a teacher of reading in a small hamlet, a woman who mended wounds and read aloud to those who could not. Justice, she discovered, could could be a quieter thing than retribution. And yet she never stopped watching, because the ledger she had refused to turn into a war could not erase the fact that the true lines of power had been tampered with. Some lies only sleep when someone decides to bury them. Years later, when a child in a market did not know how to read, Marta showed him the alphabet. He traced the letters with a calloused finger and then looked up and asked simply, "Who will keep the truth safe if those with power choose peace over justice?" Marta smiled, a small, weary thing, and answered, "Those who remember. Power and truth are not the same, and sometimes the bravest course is to refuse a crown if wearing it will cost the lives of the innocent." If you learned something from Marta's choice, help keep stories like hers alive. Subscribe to our channel so these hidden truths don't vanish into silence.